Hello. Is it on? Hi. Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I'm Kelly Hodgins. I'm from the Arrell Food Institute at the University of Guelph. We're a center for research, innovation, and science communication around food and agriculture topics. We try to be, or we are, objective, evidence-based, and just really trying to, as much as possible and as many times as possible, hold space for dialogue around really important and pertinent topics in our food system: food sustainability, food waste, food, all kinds of topics. So I personally come from an agriculture background, conventional dairy farming, but then for the past 10 years been organic, small-scale organic farming on the coast of BC. So I kind of bring both perspectives there. So I guess I'm kind of the hippie of the panel, perhaps. So I really want to hear your guys' perspectives. I'm really looking forward to sort of hearing some challenging conversations, some challenging questions, and really want to invite all of your perspectives. So thanks for having me. And I'm going to bring up the rest of the panel.
Hello, I'm Scott. And everybody else. Hi, everybody. Thanks for staying. Can I do my little post thing before we lose anybody else? So, again, just by a show of hands, can we get the house lights up? Just another kiss, if you don't mind. That's a technical term. Is it coming up? Okay, there we go. So, again, just by a show of hands, after the film, how many people still have concerns for their own safety or the safety of the planet based on the current GMOs, as we said many times in the film, case by case, the current GMOs on the market? Okay, quite a few less. Now, how many people feel that the farmers in countries like Uganda and Kenya should have the right to choose GMO technology to help fix a problem like banana wilt? Does anybody feel those farmers shouldn't have that right? Nobody? Okay, thank you very much. I can go now. Just kidding. Swag. This is called swag, everybody. Cool GMO technology swag.
Hollywood.
Okay.
Is it in the way of us? Can you guys see us?
No, they can see us. I'll be quiet now.
No. Yeah. So I was going to introduce these guys, but I would rather you guys introduce yourselves. I think that's nicer.
I'm Scott.
Okay, great.
They've seen enough of me. I'm a documentary filmmaker. This is my fourth film. I'm the producer, writer, director, co-editor, co-DP. And I started in music videos. Anybody remember Jimmy Cliff's I Can See Clearly Now? You can see the direct line from that short music video to this. I mean, it's just inevitable. Okay, I'm a little punchy. Here we go. Go ahead.
My name's Carol Culhane. I'm a professional home economist. I have an undergraduate degree in food science and nutrition. I have an MBA and a certificate in international food law from Michigan State University. I have worked in the food industry for 40 years. I started the year I graduated, which was 1978. And I operate a company called International Food Focus, and we provide regulatory compliance services as well as market assessments and evaluations for the food industry. And I'm pleased to be here this evening, so thank you for inviting me. Yes, I'm a member of IFT.
She's also an IFT member, which, if you didn't see at the end of the film, who funded the film, and we can talk about that, and it's also on our website.
Yes, I'm a food science communicator for IFT, which is a Chicago-based Chicago-based organization devoted to the food science and technology objectives. Thank you.
My name is Motlatsi Musi. I'm a farmer from South Africa. The GM grain producer, as well as livestock and other types of grains such as beans, not soybeans only, but other edible beans as well as grass feed for animals. I've been into farming since the very young age, around 10, 11 years old. I was already into commercial farming as a laborer. But with New South Africa, I own land. I own 21 hectares of land in South Africa. Thank you.
Hi, my name's Greg Hannam. I'm a crop farmer in the Guelph area, so that's with no traffic, 45 minutes east of here. Usually about an hour and a half drive, though. So I grow corn, wheat, and soybeans. I grow both GM crops and non-GMO crops on my farm. I kind of make those decisions based on what I need to do and what the field preparations and the rest of my cropping system needs. And we're a fifth-generation farm, family farm on the current location that we're at. My family farm before that, but when you move 100 miles away 100 years ago, you don't bring any documentation with you. So I'm happy to be here and would gladly answer any questions.
Yeah, my name is Ian Affleck. I'm the Executive Director of Plant Biotechnology for CropLife Canada. So CropLife Canada is a trade association. We represent, as was mentioned earlier, the manufacturers and distributors of the products that they're talking about in the film. So Monsanto is one of my members, if you're wondering who I am. But I'm just here to speak to the science that's in the film. I studied agriculture in Nova Scotia, studied at the University of Guelph, grew up on a potato farm in PEI. Worked for the government as a regulator for about 10 years, and then now work in the industry in both science, policy, and communication. So thank you all for being here tonight to get more information on this topic and to stick around for the panel discussion to hear from these other people who you're probably more interested in than me. So thanks again.
Amazing. Thank you. Delighted to share the stage with you guys. Before we begin, I also just want to acknowledge the land that we're on right now and its traditional keepers. So as we're talking about foodlands and farmlands and sustainability within our food system, it's really important to recognize that this land has been occupied for 15,000 years, specifically in this place by the Huron-Wendat, the Petun, Seneca, and most recently the Mississauga of the New Credit First Nations. So today, the meeting place of Toronto is still the home of many Indigenous people from across Turtle Island or Canada, and we're grateful to have the opportunity to meet and to work and to discuss and on this space. So for the next sort of hour or so, I'm really looking forward to hearing from all of you. And really turning the conversation to you. You've been listening for a long time, and I really want to hear your perspectives, and I think we all do. So the process for this is that we've got microphones here and here. So if you feel comfortable coming up to the microphone to ask your question, we warmly invite that. Alternatively, if you're a little bit shy or you're a little bit stuck in the middle, you can write a question on a piece of paper and hand that down the aisle. And Andy there will grab it from you, and that's an alternative. We're right here too. Okay, we'll be looking for you guys to give your questions. So either way, but really just want to encourage lots of different perspectives, lots of different opinions, and lots of conversation. And as you can see, we've got a pretty broad sort of diversity in expert voices here. So hopefully we'll be able to answer some of those. And I guess also we're going to try to keep it to one question per person and try to really keep your question concise so that we can get through multiple different.
Keep your question a question.
Keep your question to a question.
Not a rant.
Not a speech.
Well, while we're waiting for somebody to get the nerve, I'll also, if anybody would like to see more of Musi, one of the scenes that was heartbreaking to cut from the film was this incredibly long scene of him having lunch with John Nzira in South Africa, who John Nzira would identify himself as an agroecologist farmer, they would, on paper, you would call them on opposite sides of the spectrum on GMOs, and they had this incredibly kind and articulate and humble conversation about GMOs and farming in Africa and being a parent and all that. And it's on the Food Evolution Facebook page, and I highly recommend you guys check that out. It was a great pleasure to film it, and a shame not to have it in film, but thank goodness for zeros and ones, and we can share it through the beauty of the interwebs.
Okay, I see some questions being written.
Question?
And already a question at the mic.
Right.
Please.
Thank you. Mark Linus spoke in the film. He said, we're trying to build a more sustainable farming system. And so to our farmers on the panel, what would that look like for you?
More sustainable.
Okay. Farming is not, must I start by saying, is a sustainable profession, not as a subsistence occupation. So in order for us in Africa to make profits out of farming and be able to send our children to school, we need to make profits. And with technology, it is very sustainable. Hope I've answered you.
Yeah, and I would agree that when we talk about sustainability, there's lots of other environmental things that come to mind, but I think that's an important point, that sustainability, actually, part of it is you need to be financially viable to carry on. Your business needs to be sustainable. From where I sit and where I farm, the one luxury I have being in Canada and the type of operation I have access to all the tools that exist. So whether they be a GMO tool, an organic tool, a conventional tool for growing crops, I have access to all of those, and I can utilize that. So what I can do in my operation is make the best decision for each piece of land or each crop that I'm growing, and pick what tools make sense to reduce the amount of inputs I need to grow that crop, increase my production or increase my profitability off that acre, and then make sure that the land that I produce it on is actually, if I can, in better shape than it was last year. And sometimes that's a hard balance to make. Make my land better than it was the year before, and increase my profitability and production on that land. But that's the balance that we try and work with: is take all those tools and try and put them together in a way that's what our end result would be. So it's a really complicated thing to think about, sustainability. But it's actually kind of fun, and it's kind of a nice puzzle to try and put together.
Can you hear me with this?
Yes.
All right, great. So one idea that was touched on the film was that there was a gap in information about GMOs when they first came onto the market, and therefore some sources filled the information gap themselves. What information was available to the public when GMOs first came out? And if done again, what should have been done differently to fill in these gap informations?
Yeah,
Yes. Thank you. There was a person who was very active, let's say, involved in the dissemination of information of genetically modified crops in the 90s. And his name is Thomas Hoban. He's a sociologist, a risk communication expert from Northern Carolina University. And actually, he was contracted by Monsanto and a few other companies to help them inform the public that this technology was being commercialized. The odd thing was, nobody listened to him. And he was a person who was very in favor of this technology, and he was vilified by a number of groups for even being in favor of the technology. Now remember, he's not a life scientist. He's really a social scientist. He came to Canada a number of times, but there was just something that the Monsantos of the world just seemed to have a blind ear or eye to how to communicate this technology. In fact, I remember hearing one particular public relations company say, it's almost like they have a genetic defect. That they are the experts in genetic technology, but they weren't experts in communication. The odd thing was that they would reach out to these people and just sit there and nod. So there was a gap. this debate of labeling or not labeling. And I was always in favor of labeling. And yet there were people in the Life Sciences, I'm also a member of Life Sciences Ontario, saying, shh, don't say that. And there was this one very prominent scientist who said to me one day, he said, Carol, I have so much respect for your research, but I really wish you'd change some of your opinions. Because I was in favor of labeling. If this is so wonderful, why don't we tell people where it is? And I wasn't the only person who felt that way. Sure. Anyway, that argument was lost, and labeling being something to sort of vilify rather than to identify the product. Then we haven't heard very much about genetically modified for many years. Now it's been 20 years now that it was 1994 that the Flavor Saver tomato came out. So now we are hearing more about it. I also feel that and can see that some of the applications have very strong consumer benefits. So it is initiatives like this particular film, which is changing the dialogue. But I also believe there are always going to be groups of people who are just not comfortable with anyone changing any genetic makeup of anything. And I'm just going to say, get used to it. That's the way it's going to be. Because, like I say, not everyone is going to be comfortable with it.
Maybe I can add to that from an industry point of view when you say what happened at the beginning, and I think you're completely right. There was some effort made to try to speak out to the public, but not nearly enough by the companies that, for example, my member companies. We botched this 20 years ago. And what happened was, as you said, we weren't very good at PR. We weren't very good at explaining what our products were. What we were good at identifying was who our customers were. And the companies identified the customers as the Gregs of the world, that we sell seeds to you, so we're going to explain to you why it works. And it's not our job to talk to the public. We'll put a little bit of money into it. We'll make an effort. Oh, that didn't go well. Okay, we're going to leave that alone. So what the companies did really well is they spoke to the 2 to 3% of people in the world that grow food, and they didn't really end up speaking at all to the rest of the 97% of the world that eats the food. So what that left is someone who was opposed to the technology, that was willing to speak to the other 97%, basically had the conversation all to themselves. So we just weren't there. We didn't do enough. We're trying to do better now, and we've realized that although our primary customers are the farmers, nobody else necessarily is going to take on, like a superstore is not going to take on the job to educate the public on the science behind every different production methodology that goes into all the different foods that are on the shelf. They couldn't do it. There's too many different production techniques. So we as an industry have to do a better job of getting information to the consumer and being more transparent and being available for discussions. And I think we're making an effort to do that now, but I think we're still learning how to get good at it. I still think it's, as you said, it's not in our DNA. So we're still learning how to communicate.
And listening to the experts.
Yeah.
If I could draft off that a little bit as a father, as a consumer of food, and a journalist and a filmmaker, some other pieces that were very interesting to me that didn't make it into the film were the fact that GMO technology was on the table when the USDA was considering the rules for organic certification. And there were some in the organic industry in the natural foods industry at that point, the organic industry was still coming up, that said no to that. And if there was something that I'd like to see going forward, as we hear from Pam Ronald, geneticist, and her husband, Rahul Adamchek, organic farmer, is the yes and, right? Some people, the artwork, we're very proud of it, but it does seem to be pitting, GMO versus organic. We use that very much as a striking image to try and sell the film, but the people that made it a GMO versus organic conversation was mostly the organic industry. I've never seen a GMO farmer holding up a sign saying, don't grow organically. Never, ever at all. So, sorry, to put that aside, I want to embrace the yes and of it, right? That you can grow a GMO seed organically if you choose to do that. But let's have the whole conversation about that. And then one other piece about labeling, I'm troubled by the labeling piece. I completely get why you wanted to get out in front of it and have it labeled. What's frustrated me, and I think that probably would have been the right time to do it, what frustrates me about it are the people that use the labeling argument to say, look, they don't want to be transparent. And then I see some of those same people not being transparent. Vermont was a state, some people were very proud in Vermont that they were going to be the first state to label GMOs before it became national labeling conversation under Obama. And one of the things that really showed the cards for me about why some people wanted to have the label was when they grandfathered in the entire dairy industry. No GMO labeling on that dairy industry. Why? Because that industry didn't want to have the skull and crossbones of GMO. And they allowed that. So where is the real transparency? So that's my frustration. What I want to see is actually what Obama said too, is to have a QR code. It's very expensive, but you can know the carbon footprint. You can know anything you want about it. You can know if your organic apple, how much copper sulfate was used to grow your organic apples. So I just want to see real transparency, not just GMO transparency with the labeling.
Thank you for answering the question.
Good question.
It does make me wonder if some of the items that at the end of the film were shown, so the oranges and the peanuts, and what was the last one that was coming down the pipe? Mosquitoes that are sort of coming down the pipe. Maybe if those had been maybe out at the outset, there might have been a different consumer opinion versus the products that were first coming out that were BT or
they were very far
Roundup Ready. They were very farmer serving and not really resonating with the general public.
Absolutely.
And there would have been a much different conversation. Anyways, we have another person at the microphone.
Hi, I'm Steve. I'm actually a vertical farmer in Toronto. I'd like to start by saying I don't really give a shit about organic, thank you. I actually, the true key word here is traceability, and that's a whole nother documentary.
Sorry,
but
is what's the key word?
Traceability.
Traceability.
But we won't get into that today. Also, really respect our soil farmers. I truly, you guys do a lot of work, probably even a lot more than me. But I have a question for you. It's kind of a two-parter. If you could go back, if the stars align, if you could go back to your grandfather's way of farming, to the no-till farming, the crop cover, would you do that? And would you agree that it's more sustainable in the long term? Your soil is more healthy. You get a better product. You actually have less pests.
Yeah, I would. Thanks for the question. I would disagree with that if I went back to the way my grandfather farmed. I still utilize all the tools that he used in his cropping system, as far as having green cover crops in off seasons and utilizing the tools that he used. And I have the opportunity now to add other tools to the mix in doing that. Do I have more pests? Probably. But nothing to do with the way I'm farming. That's just the natural evolution of other living things. That's what happens. And when we talk about a sustainability, no, I don't think that we have this dream and vision that what we did and how we did it 60 or 100 years ago was the right way to do it. I don't think we actually understand how economically depressed agriculture was in some of those time periods, and they really scraped by and only could do what they could do. I think with the advent and adoption of technology in agriculture that we have now, actually we're I wouldn't tell my grandfather passed away quite a while ago, and I would never say it, but I think we're better farmers than they were back then. And I think, and that's just, maybe we're the same in every industry, that we're maybe better than what we were before, and that's what we want to strive to be. So hopefully I answered your question.
And I might add one question for you guys. Well, I know on the farm that I grew up on today, we probably do the least amount of tillage that we've ever done on our farm, going back as many generations as I can think. Now, potato production is a different operation, but I don't know if you'd consider your farm, when your grandfather had it, to be no-till.
Yeah, no, actually, there was no-till didn't exist back then. No-till is something that the industry adopted really 60s, 70s, and then again, and it went away for a while, and came back in the 90s. The utilization of GMO crops actually allowed me to adopt more no-till into my cropping system, and now 3/4 of the crops that I grow are grown in no-till. Any one field that I farm only gets worked maybe once every 5 years. All the other times I no-till into that crop. I incorporate green manure crops where I grow a crop of red clover and let it die and incorporate it back into the soil. So there's lots of all these other tools. And before we had Roundup Ready soybeans, when I grew soybeans in Ontario, the chemicals that we were using to control weeds weren't working anymore. So I was having to adopt more tillage, So I had to work every acre of ground that I was going to plant soybeans on. I might have to work it 2 or 3 times, which really destroys the soil structure. And then to control the weeds in crop, I might have to spray it 2 or 3 or 4 times, and I still might not have full control. And then in order to harvest properly, I'd have to go in and kill the weeds down before I could drive the combine through it. And so with the adoption of Roundup Ready soybeans, I was able to control weeds better, get a no-till system back up and running, which then reduced the amount of weed pressure that I would have in a field at any one time or any one year. And it's not to say that I have to spray my crops with Roundup when I grow a Roundup Ready crop. What it does is give me the opportunity to use that tool. If the weather conditions and the field conditions dictate that I need to use it, I will. But it costs money. So why would I spend money on something that I don't need? So I'll assess the need and utilize the tool that makes sense.
In my view, that platform no longer exists. Where my forefathers used to grow food no longer exists on this planet because even our water is polluted. We have less oxygen in the air than our forefathers had. Many things have changed. So that platform will never ever exist. So there is no going back. From mining, from the chimneys generating electricity, and all of that. Those things, did we have them maybe 100 years ago or 200 years ago? I don't know how far back your forefathers handed over to you, but history tells of 1800s. So is there such a platform moving back 1,000 years maybe?
Just to follow up on that, we had a question from the audience, and that links in was sort of already half answered by you, Greg. But the audience member was asking if you are growing GM crops and non-GM crops on your land, how do you decide when and where? And so, if we believe that GM is most useful, why don't we just use it all? So in the context of your farm, how do you make that decision? Both of you, sure.
We can grow GM grains alongside conventional and without cross-pollinating, because the very system we use to grow yellow and white maize in South Africa is enough for me to produce GM and non-GM. The timing is important. Yes.
Yeah, and on my farm, for making the decision on whether I grow a GM crop or a non-GMO crop, the first thing is what is the need on that farm, and it's really basically on a business decision. Absolutely, some non-GMO stuff is worth more money if you can harvest it in good quality and sell it into a premium market. So you make that business decision to say, do I need the tools on this farm or this piece of land that a GMO crop would help me grow a better, more sustainable crop? If so, absolutely use it. If not, is there an opportunity where I could grow something that's higher value and make a premium on it? Well, then that would be a business decision that I would make. Realistically, on my farm, that instance of being able to get a premium for a non-GMO existed a lot more 10 years ago than it does now. So now when I make those analysis on a year-to-year basis to say what should I grow, I grow more and more genetically modified crops, GMO crops, because that's what the business model tells me to do.
Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah, I can. I remember in terms of communication by the industry that the challenge was that there was nothing from the early products for the consumer. And so maybe you can comment on that, because at the end of the day, the benefits even now are vastly for the farming community. Therefore, you needed farmers to talk about it in a positive way. But my other question is around the labeling, because I understand that Health Canada has not approved labeling per se, because what does it mean? What does labeling GMO-free mean? So I'd like a comment about that, and that's why it hasn't moved forward. In fact, it just reminds me, I was in Loblaws a lot, and I see all of their bread from Ace is labeled GMO-free.
Oh, and I love those crackers so much.
What? Yeah, I mean,
what'd you say?
I love those crackers so much.
Yeah.
It hurt. Like, it literally hurt. And
I don't know whether they're GMO-free, but all of their bread is GMO-free.
No, the crackers are too.
So I've asked people, why is it GMO-free? Because there are no wheat varieties that I'm aware of where the technology is used. So of course it's GMO-free. And it's a great example of how misleading that can be.
Gluten-free potato chips? GMO-free salt?
I think that's a good point.
Ray, would you like to introduce yourself?
I remember one of the first.
This is Ray Mowling, who worked for Monsanto for many years. And very, very pleased to have you here this evening.
It's good to be here. Wouldn't miss it.
I kind of say there's a couple of different elements to that, but I remember the idea of absence labeling isn't a new thing. It's been around, and I remember coming from potato farm, and the first time we saw it was cholesterol-free French fries. And I remember my dad going, I was like, well, that's not hard. There's no cholesterol in French fries anyway. So that's an easy label. So and that was back in the early 80s before we got into the kind of the how many does not contain stickers can you put on a label, right? That's a value proposition now. And as much as that might be troublesome, I do also sympathize with those that are trying to market a product in a really competitive marketplace. So I'm really glad I don't have to make those decisions.
But we should make those decisions.
Yeah,
to remove all of them and start over. Make something that's good and safe and delicious, and let us choose to buy it or not. It's very kind of you to have sympathy for them in a competitive marketplace, and it is very competitive across the board. But it's just a mess. It's just a mess.
Consumers need direction. We're increasingly distanced from our food supply, and that is not changing. More and more people.
But I don't think those labels are giving them direction.
Well, no.
That's the problem. I agree with you completely on the direction, but let's give them really good information instead of them giving them confusing information.
But just to go, I think the first element of the question was on the early communication.
What's the answer to a better communication when all of the early products, in fact, I don't know of any products right now. The Flavor Savor tomato was an attempt at that, longer shelf life, etc. But there's no products that I'm aware of that actually have specifically a consumer benefit.
Potato.
Yeah, I think there's two.
Apples.
I could challenge that, because if there were no papayas, as they have in then the price of the papayas from the countries that didn't have that virus would be much higher. So there is a consumer benefit from the Hawaiian papaya.
Right, but the taste of a papaya is the same. Well, that's what I was getting at.
Yeah.
In other words, the economic impact of saving the papaya was an economic impact, and most people have no idea that happened in Hawaii.
That's right. That's right. And they don't need any herbicides at all. The Flavor Savor tomato, I understand, was a bit of a misnomer. They said there wasn't much flavor there to save.
Right. It was supposed to be delicious as a pasta sauce, I was told.
Well, it was picked a little early, you see, to keep the sort of firmness, and that there was a flavor trade-off. But its flavor was increased with heat, which is why it made a very good tomato paste. But it wasn't a good eating tomato.
But I think there's a couple examples coming, and I think you heard Greg's example of how he makes a decision on his farm, so why there's a benefit, and that benefit keeps food costs down, it keeps food production, it makes it more sustainable. But exactly to what you're saying, that's hard to explain to someone who, not of no fault of their own, hasn't spent any time on a farm. Like, not everybody can spend time on a farm. So we've done a poor job of trying to explain that. I think, in essence, it's hard to explain, period, because it's so far down the ladder before that benefit hits. But the couple of products that are coming out is the Arctic apple, which is invented by Okanagan Specialty Fruits out of BC. So this is an apple where you can cut it And if you take a bite out of an apple, you cut it, you leave it on the table, and it turns brown in like 20 minutes, and then no one wants to eat it because it looks really ugly. Well, the Arctic apple used genetic engineering to essentially turn off that browning color. So if you want, you could cut your apples on Sunday night, put them in your fridge, and all week you could put them in your lunches and they wouldn't go brown. So there's a consumer trait where someone can actually see what's in it, why should I embrace this, why should I try these in my home? And then the potato is a similar technology where if you drop a potato and then you boil it, it gets that black spot on it that looks really ugly. You get a lot of food waste through that. Same thing with the apple, you get a lot of food waste. So with the non-browning potato, they're saying it's about 20 to 30% less food waste when it comes to that's how much potatoes get banged around between when they get from my clumsy hands at the farm all the way through to the chef at the end of the day. And the chef gets a benefit from it because the one thing a chef doesn't have much of is space in their restaurant. So if you got to have 130 pounds of potatoes to get 100 pounds of servable potatoes, but I could tell you I can just deliver you 100 pounds and you'll get 100 pounds, that's a big deal for a chef. So these kind of traits, I think, will make a difference. And I think along with that, the banana that was discussed on the film has a story that resonates better than making it easier for a farmer to grow soybeans, which is hard. It's hard to make that connection. And yeah.
Thanks.
I have a question here from the audience, and I appreciate this one. To the director, I'm calling you out. Thank you for making the people on the non-GMO side look like morons. Which, okay.
They just thanked me for that?
Yeah. Well,
is there a sarcasm emoticon with that, or is that a?
Which I think is a fair point. I grew up for the last 10 years, I've been in the organic side of things in a town that is designated GE free, and I don't think I look like those people. But so there are other people out there that are questioning or cynical or skeptical. So why just focus on? There's another one for the panel.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So it wasn't a question. It was a statement.
It was a statement.
To the director,
Do you want to
thank you
respond?
for making the people in the look like morons. Okay. Was that snarky? I guess that was snarky. Okay. Was not my goal to make anyone look like a moron. Were there things that people who are anti-GMO or anti-science say that can sound ridiculous? Yes. Can they make me laugh in the editing room? Yes. Is humor a tool that I use as a storyteller? Yes. So that was the purpose of it. I used their own words to communicate what they clearly wanted to communicate, and sometimes it's funny. So I tried my best to treat everybody in the film as honestly as I understood them, right, with my experience. My definition of a documentary is the adaptation of the truth, right? And some people would hear, oh, adaptation, what do you mean it's an adaptation? Of course it's an adaptation. A documentary, some people think a documentary is magically the truth. It's all an adaptation. Now the question is, how hard do I work to try and keep that truth as real as possible? That is who that person is. These are the facts. This is the data, as truthful as possible. So there's been some people that have been frustrated by that. I would also say to people that are frustrated by that, many of the people you see in the film are the top of the pyramid in terms of the anti-GMO communicators, and that's not my fault.
I think that's an excellent point, that the key people focused on the film are the communicators of this anti-movement, and I think there's a difference between those people. There's also those who market organic products, which is another element that has moments, I will say it that way, but then there's organic farmers, and I think you'll notice in the film that nobody's going after an organic farmer for making a business choice.
Emma's an organic farmer. Raul's an organic farmer.
Yeah, so I think sometimes when we say organic industry, all of these people get lumped in, but like Jeffrey Smith is not the organic industry. He's a leader of an anti-movement. So I wouldn't want to get the feeling that we're we're lumping all elements of people who work in this space into one giant ball. But what's highlighted here, it's pretty good adaptation from what I've experienced.
The audience is never wrong. I can't change somebody's feeling about how the movie made them feel, and that's completely valid for them to feel that way.
Wonderful. I do still wonder when they were not, this wasn't yours, but it was the clip that came where they were interviewing the people at the farmers market. What does GMO stand for?
Sure.
That went around the internet a whole bunch. And I wondered how many people they interviewed to get those stupid people's clips. But anyways, stupid responses. I don't know. It was curious. Question to the panel: If Monsanto, DuPont, Bayer, these are big ag technology companies, fund the science, how can the results be unbiased? Can you go against the entity that signs your paycheck?
Excellent question.
That sounds somewhat directed at me, I think.
I think it's you.
So I think it's a very relevant question. How can you trust the science coming from a company that has a vested interest in the success of the product? I think that's a very realistic, and anyone would have that question, whether it's Nike shoes or Volkswagen emission tests. Thank you, Volkswagen. Or any company that's doing their own science. But this is how science, this is how government regulation is approached in any industry. You make requirements, strict requirements on the industry to produce data. You verify that data. You check it to make sure that they are providing the honest data. And then you don't only accept that data, but you look at independent science that is not funded by the industry, that has no, if you want to call it, conflict of interest or no association. So the bodies that were highlighted in the film are not only making this determination based on the studies that are completed by these large companies, but they're looking at all the science around the world. And those 2,000 studies, I think it's half of them or more are independent studies. I'd have to look up the numbers specifically. So those bodies, those global scientific bodies that are independent, don't make those kind of statements lightly. Those are very serious statements that the integrity of their scientific organizations are part of. So I think that's why you can have faith that when Health Canada or the Canadian Food Inspection Agency or the FAO or the World Health Organization comes out with one of these statements, that it is a rigorous decision. And for the second question, can you make a decision that goes against your paycheck? And my paycheck is one that's paid by those companies. I believe that my scientific integrity comes first. I wouldn't work in this space if I didn't see the science behind these products. And I think one of my jobs is, on behalf of the industry, if there is a problem, that I'm there to raise the flag and help the industry figure out how to deal with it. And one that's a legitimate issue, and it was somewhat touched on in the film, is weeds can become resistant to pesticides. And you'll hear super weeds and things like this as you go forward. Weed resistance didn't begin when genetically modified crops came on the market. Did the advent of Roundup-ready crops accentuate weed resistance problems in Roundup, like Rob Fraley said? Yes. But now we have to solve that problem, figure out the new agronomic practices to deal with them, and continue to move forward. So when problems arise, we deal with them, but the core science of the safety of this food is very rigorous, and the Health Canada and the CFIA wouldn't have put these products forward if they didn't have absolute confidence that they're safe.
And if I could take that a bit further, again, as a father looking at this situation, as a journalist, on first blanch, you hear industry-funded science, and you go, ouch, scary, can I trust it? The beauty of science, now that goes in both directions. We gave Charles Benbrook a very hard time because he was making studies that I think the evidence showed that he was failing at the scientific method. He was asked to promise results, and he promised results. That's the fail. Not that he was funded by the organic industry. I don't have a problem if Whole Foods funds a study, as long as they allow them to not promise the results. And the beauty of the scientific method, is it repeatable? So if Charles Benbrook does a study that he finds out that one time organic milk was 0.00002% more protein than non-organic milk, that's single study syndrome. You need to repeat that, and God forbid that you have more definitive results than 0.0002. So you get my point. As a journalist, it's also the conflict of interest versus perceived conflict of interest. If some people have called me a propagandist making this film, and that was very hurtful and frustrating, and I say back to them, show me the data that supports that, right? And they've been very quiet when I asked them that. Many of them have never even seen the film. So we have to really distinguish between perceived conflict of interest and real conflict of interest, or I can't read the Washington Post, I can't read the New York Times, on and on and on. Not that all of those institutions don't have imperfections as well, but look at the batting average, and so I've said enough.
I'd also like to comment on the length of time it takes to develop these products. As the scientists who developed the Hawaiian papaya, rainbow papaya, mentioned, it took 7 years for them to make sure that the sequence was correct and repeatable. That was 7 years. Then they had to start their crop trials. And we heard in Africa that one lady was ready to buy that product for her own farm, but they said, you're still 2 to 4 years away from getting that approved. The Arctic apple that Ian mentioned was just approved last year, I believe. It was either 2016, 2017 by Health Canada. They thought they were ready for Health Canada in 2006, and they weren't. They still had to do more work. So they had already at that point defined their sequence and were doing crop trials. So that gives you an indication of the length of time it takes to commercialize this technology. And there's all sorts of information on Health Canada's website under novel foods as to the methods that they use to assess crops, genetically modified crops. And once you get to Health Canada, they say it could take 7 years.
Hey, yeah, I'm not just holding up the microphone stand. One of my biggest concerns is this organic other divide. I like the pursuit of organic. I think they mean they want to pursue sustainability, healthier for the soil, healthier for the environment. I'd love to hear from all the panelists, and partly because, Scott, I'm not sure if this is true, but I heard that part of your pursuit of this film was because your tribe, your California community, and California is an interesting state, for sure, we pay attention to it, was organic, was anti-GM, was this. And you, kind of like Mark Linus, had this need to figure out the science. But from Kelly on down, I'd like to hear what your thoughts are on how we divide this adequate picture here, the fracture for the organic industry using good technology to achieve the goals that I think, again, at the heart of the issue, we all want, and that's sustainable, healthy, nutritious food.
In 1 or 2 sentences.
Yeah, no, and I think the film did a good job of saying, yeah, we are sort of arguing for the same things, or all in pursuit of the same things. And living in Pell River for the past 10 years, which is on the coast of BC, and a designated GE-free city, was really interesting because I was surrounded by all farmers who were fully in support of the local food movement, the alternative food movement, and organic, naturally. And I am a complete 100% proponent of that movement as well. But I felt that that being part of that meant that I also had to be anti-GM, and I'm not pro-GM either. But what I don't like about this debate so far in the past few decades that we've been debating it is that there is no room for this. Like, there's no room for discussing the complexity and where it's appropriate and where it might not be, and where is the gray area. And it really has always felt for me to be either you're for or against. And so that's been my frustration.
Okay, so I'm going to slightly disagree with you. Not disagree with your intentions, not disagree with what you find attractive about organic farming, but again, there is no one who would be on the other side of that divide. So if you're saying organic and non-organic, I've never seen anybody that doesn't grow organic saying stop growing organic. I have seen people on the organic side saying stop growing GMO. Stop using your pesticides, but our pesticides are okay. So I'm speaking in broad terms. There are a lot of organic farmers that have excellent intentions and make beautiful products. There's a lot of organic marketers that have used this communication to say, that's evil food, and it's going to poison your children and poison the planet, and here's God's food. And it's beautiful and it's pure. And they've been incredibly successful at selling that. And that is an oversimplification at best and evil marketing at worst. Some, okay? So I don't want to remove organic farming as an option. Again, Emma's an organic farmer in the film. Pam and Raul he's an organic farmer, and they want to find a sustainable choice. So my other question to you would be, what you like about organic farming, if you could snap your fingers and say, I want an all-organic planet, would you want that?
Me?
Yes.
No.
Why not?
In fact, our family farm is not even certified organic for a number of reasons as well that just don't make sense in that context. Great. So our neighbor is certified organic. As a result, we do some contracting for him. As a result, he can't use Roundup to spray his weeds, so we have to go in and plow his land, turn it all over so that the weed seeds die in the sun, and then till it all up, and cultivate and replant again. That my dad gets so frustrated with how much diesel fumes and fossil fuels are being used. Sure. Because he's certified organic. He can't just put on a little bit of topical application of Roundup.
Yes, and exactly.
So that's just one example of where we need. There's just so much complexity in each farm, and each practice is different. And these, like Greg was saying earlier, you have a toolkit that's available to you, and there's just no way to be on one side or the other fully.
Well, if I would just call the one side, use the best information you have to do the best farming that you can. That's the side for me. But.
Yeah.
Organic food started out of a necessity. It's become an ideology. It's here to stay. It became a necessity. It started actually in UK after World War II, where they didn't have any chemicals. It was a very, very poor country. They didn't have chemicals to help farmers grow. They had to find other methods, and Lady Mountbatten was very involved in the start of the organic sector industry. So that's where it grew. By the time, say, genetically modified food came along, that's when people were starting to think about, well, how is my food growing? And I think we can thank genetically modified for getting people to, raising some awareness. I never thought of that before. How is my food growing? The organic sector has learned a lot. A number of universities, we saw that University of California has an organic sector. It took a long time for University of Guelph to get organic being taught to students, because prior to that it was all trial and error. So talk about safety or food safety. They didn't even know to what temperature they should be incinerating manure and use that manure as a fertilizer. So it is becoming a lot more subjected to rules, their own rules. There is some trials being done. It's always going to be with us, I believe. It's a huge sector. It's growing all the time. But I think also an important part of organic, there's some work being done at University of Ottawa by the Telfer School of Management, which, yes, I did graduate from there, which is why I know about this. But what I find interesting about this work being done at the University of Ottawa is it's not a university associated with any agricultural practices. So it's very unbiased and very independent. And what they're finding out in studying the organic consumer is when there's very little brand loyalty. As long as it's organic, that's fine. But the other thing they're finding out is these people are very mistrustful. And they want to be as close as possible to the source of the food. In fact, some of the people who are closest to the source of the food, who, let's say, belong to co-ops, are those who are most mistrustful. So there's something there that organic food is fulfilling for these people. And the basis, according to this University of Ottawa study, is this matter of trust. And perhaps I like the point that you make that, yes, they're never telling anyone not to grow organic. I think that could be something that this idea then of mistrust, if they would listen to that message and that perspective, that might help them become more assured.
And we're just running a little bit low on time, so just going to try to speed up our responses.
Growing organic food or non-organic, to me, is a bit confusion. Is it about how you feed your plant, or is an organic plant, how does it differ from a GMO in producing food? How do I put it? You can grow GM seeds using organic matter to feed the plant. Or do you people producing organic food, are you not using other kinds of fertilizers at all and pesticides? What's the difference when you look at the periodic table? What's the difference in producing that kind of food?
And what's your concern about synthetic chemicals versus organic chemicals?
What did you say?
You got to get more. Okay, we'll get more specific outside. We'll get more specific outside.
Sure.
It's relevant. And you have concerns about toxic chemicals and manure being used in organic farming as well, correct? For those same purposes.
Or less.
Okay.
Or much less, but do you both use chemicals? You're using less if you use... okay. All right. Can you... and then I don't want to be man on man, but I'd love to have answers, really. If you're not using chemicals, what can you use to do 100 hectares? How much compost do you need?
We should have a conversation. But I do aquaponics, and so I actually does fish in my system actually produce fertilizer.
Emma does the same.
Yes, you can do...
He's not soil farming. He's not soil farming.
He's not farming in
which
soil,
is a great
he's using
choice.
aquaculture.
And no one, I don't think anyone in this room wants to stop you from that choice. The question is, should we all get on that bus, or should you be choosing that bus? And we should have lots of different buses. I'm thinking a lot of people in this room would like to get on a bus to go somewhere that has food at this point.
Yeah, just a couple of quick comments from my perspective, organic farming versus conventional farming. I think that they're both great business models, and I think if somebody can grow a product and somebody's willing to pay a premium for it, I think that's good for them, good business. I have a bunch of friends that are organic farmers, and they do a good job of managing their crops and growing their managing their land and what they do. I think the challenge we have is right from our marketing standpoint in North America that they've unfortunately there are people who will say negative things about conventional farming and free speech. They're welcome to have their opinion, but I don't want necessarily everyone to take that as the truth. I think if you really want to understand organic farming, you need to actually pick a product and pick a country that it came from and understand the practices that were used to grow that organic crop. Because I don't know personally, but I suspect that in some countries, in some organic systems, there are practices that they use that we wouldn't necessarily in Canada think that would be an organic practice, and if not, that's great. I think that's. But from a consumer standpoint, I think if you really want to understand and believe that what you're buying is a better product, you actually need to do the research to figure out is that exactly doing what you want it to do. And there's lots of good business models out there for all different types of farming, and I think that we should do whatever works for you and makes you money, and it all helps feed the world.
I think just for me, I think it's unfortunate as an agricultural scientist that we've put a fence around organic practices and conventional practices. They're just farming practices from a scientific point of view, and I think the research being done by the organic professor here is extremely important. Those things can be integrated into agricultural practice. So to me, the marketing fence has crept into our science lens, and that bothers me as a scientist. We should be funding farming research in all spaces to be used in all kinds of farming. So I think that's good for me. I think we've had a gentleman that's been very patient.
Do we have time for one more?
Such a good answer.
I'm just waiting for
Yes. This has to be the last question.
All
but
right.
You've been standing for a long time,
Yes,
so I really
let's.
want you to get to.
Yes, let's.
What was that answer?
Okay, so just if anybody wants to comment, and if everybody'd like to comment, that'd be great. Other than this film, what should our next steps be in educating the public? Because I came here without a lot of knowledge about GMOs. I still had a single question in my head when it was all said and done, and I'll talk to that outside. But my question to you is, how do we get everybody to know what I saw here in this film tonight?
What a great question.
That's a really good question.
The film is currently available on... yeah, so you did say other than this film, and it's a very good question. Think Twice. It's a wonderful book called Thinking Fast and Slow. And we have two types of thinking as human beings. Type 1 is more instinctual, using our gut, and it got us a long way from caveman till now. And type 2 is more analytical. So if type 1 is GMO bad, organic good, forgive the binary again, but simple. Type 2 is what you just so beautifully described. Think twice, case by case. There's an incredible TED Talk by one of the heads of the World Wildlife Fund where he uses 2 words to talk about sustainability. It depends. Look at the whole picture. So at a cocktail party, on your social media feed, ask people to think twice.
I'll maybe go. Yeah, that was great. But I think along those lines, I'll kind of shooting from the hip here because I think you asked a question I hadn't thought of before, and it's a really good question. I don't think that the industry trying to communicate to the general public is going to solve that problem. It's a part of it. We have to be transparent and get the information out there, but we inherently will not be the #1 credible voice in this space. People will always have to that question about the science. There'll be a little bit of, okay, that's what they said, but what do other people say? So to that point, I think what we have to do is we have to teach critical thinking in schools at a younger age. So that when someone hears something like GMOs cause autism, someone might go, that sounds pretty drastic. I'm going to look for, I have the tools to know where to find neutral information. And I think that's what's not being taught right now or taught enough, or we could help get that taught more. Because if you equip people to do that, not just in this space, but that conversation will fuel itself. Because people will go and search out neutral information by which to make their point. And then if you do have the science on your side, the right decisions will be made. So I don't know if I dodged the question there, but that's my...
And if I can, I know it's late, but Neil deGrasse Tyson is one of the first people that I've ever heard articulate. There's lots of different defenses of the importance of science and education. But he was the first one that pointed out exactly what you just said, which is teaching the scientific method, not just science dissecting a frog, different elements of science, but using the scientific method to make decisions in the science classroom, in every part of your life. So that's the next phase of the film for us as well, is going from middle schools through colleges to try and really change that. And last thing, I might make a food series called Food Fraud that's going to try and scientifically vet all the food documentaries, all the food diet books, and really just, not every single one of them, of course, but...
I was going to say, that's a full career.
It's yes.
Because they're coming
I'll have that
fast.
finished in about 30 years, everybody. Thanks for your patience.
Yeah. I think that's a wonderful topic to close on. We do have other questions, but we are going to stick around in the lobby and chat with you. So come up to any of us who you think is the coolest to chat with. But really,
Thanks, everybody. Thank you so much.
For being part of this conversation.